Good afternoon, everyone. And today we will continue our essay writing introduction. But before that, we're just going to go through this short activity that I had uploaded on the Google Classroom, right? So we start off with multiple choice. And the instruction says, read the following passage carefully and then answer the question on the basis of what is stated or implied. You can highlight or underline your answer. From time immemorial, men have hunted wild animals in forests, tilled the soil, and caught fish in the sea and rivers, all with the object of obtaining food, that basic commodity essential to existence. Agriculture is part and parcel of life and is as old as mankind. Yet even in the most primitive times, men always had certain tools, hunting implements, knives, spears, and flints to help him conquer nature and support himself. As knowledge progressed over the centuries, so man developed more and more devices to aid and adorn his life. The corn from the soil was ground into flour and baked into bread. Textile and clothing were made, and buildings, such as castles and churches, were created. The art of printing was discovered, and this led to the production of more and more books. Metal goods were turned out at forges and workshops throughout the country. Great sailing vessels were constructed, and a whole host of goods, ever increasing in variety as time went by, were manufactured by men. Industry, which is a name given to those occupations in which something is manufactured, has thus for a very long time been an important part of man's existence. Tinkers, tailors, candlestick makers, ironmongers, blacksmiths, tanners, weavers, spinners, and many others were an essential part of life in olden days. These were the people who manufactured the goods and articles that society wanted and needed. The manufacturing industry was very closely associated with agricultural life. Many of the spinners, weavers, and others did not work in the cities or towns, but in their own cottages in rural villages. During snowing, plowing, and harvest time, all activity was concentrated on the fields. But in the long winter months, with little or nothing to be done on the land, industrial work took place of agricultural work. Spinning wheels spun wool into yarn, and weaving looms wove yarn into cloth. In many parts of the country, agricultural laborers in summer became industrial workers in the winter. Right, so we can go along to our questions. Question number 1. Man has always been involved in agriculture in order to, and we can go back up to the passage to get an answer from this. But before that, we have 4 options: earn a living, conquer nature, become wealthy, obtain his food. And we can find that the answer is in the first paragraph, as it says, from time immemorial, men have hunted wild animals in forests, tilled the soil, and caught fish in the sea and rivers, all with the object of obtaining food, that basic commodity essential to existence. And with that being said, the answer would be D. All right, question number 2. According to the passage, which of the following has man used throughout his life to improve his agricultural production? And going back up, we can see the answer again is in paragraph 1. Agriculture is part and parcel of life and is as old as mankind. Yet even in the most primitive times, man has always had certain tools, etc., that he used to help him conquer nature and support himself. So the answer would be A. Question 3. The word adorn, as used in line 7, is closest in meaning to, we have A, protect, D, improve, C, lengthen, D, decorate. So we know that in a general setting, adorn would be closest in meaning to decorate. But let's see what the context is in this passage. So line 7 would be in the second paragraph. So it says, as knowledge progressed over the centuries, so man developed more and more devices to aid and adorn his life. And then we have several examples after, including corn from the soil was grown into flour and baked into bread, etc., etc. So from the options given here, decorate, even though it would be the denotative definition of this word. From the context that we gain, we can say that adorn is closest in meaning to improve, which is B. Number 4, according to the passage, tinkers, tailors, candlestick makers, and weavers were all important in the olden days because they, A, set the trends in fashion, B, provided employment for the society, C, were considered the providers in the society, or D, established themselves as people in authority. So going back up, we would have to look at paragraph 3. And here it says, tinkers, tailors, candlestick makers, ironmongers, blacksmiths, tanners, weavers, spinners, and many others were all an essential part of life in olden days. These were the people who manufactured goods and articles that society wanted and needed. So from this sentence, we can say that these people were considered the providers of the society, making C the answer of number 4. Number 5, in medieval times, spinning and weaving were considered A, cottage industries, B, heavy industries, C, weekend jobs, D, pastimes. And we can find this answer or infer this answer from paragraph 4, where it says, many of the spinners and weavers and others did not work in the towns or cities, but in their own cottages in the rural villages. So although it didn't outright say that these occupations were classified as cottage industries, we can infer that they were indeed cottage industries since they worked in their cottage instead of going to the city. Number 6, the writer makes it clear that many villagers were disenchanted with life in the city, underemployed during the winter, threatened by the growth of industry, or involved in both manufacturing and farming. And then we can see that in the last sentence, where it says agricultural laborers in summer became industrial workers in winter. So they were involved in both manufacturing and farming. Number 7, the writer suggests that the overall result of manufacturing has been to A, increase living standards, B, increase food production, C, mechanize the production of goods, or D, increase the spread of information. So all throughout the paragraph, we have seen where, yes, it talks about obtaining food, especially in regards to agriculture. Talks about knowledge being increased, so more devices are there to adorn his life. And many examples are given there. The art of printing, textile and clothing, metal goods, etc., etc. So from this passage, the best answer for this question would have to be to raise living standards. Even though all of these options can be a result of manufacturing as we know it. But from this passage specifically, it speaks to raising living standards. And question number 8, which is our last multiple choice question. From the passage, it is evident that man has turned increasingly to industry. Many laborers did not like agricultural work. Manufacturing industries did not exist in primitive times. Or there were many large factories for manufacturing goods. So just to go up for reference, talks about how knowledge has progressed over the centuries in the second paragraph, first sentence, the art of printing again, metal goods, then industry is brought up in the third paragraph. And it has been a part of man's existence for a very long time. So from these, we can just eliminate and say that A would be the most suitable answer. Man has turned increasingly to industry as more knowledge has been gained over time. And we ourselves can see that as well in our own world, as people are drifting away from agricultural work and moving on to other types of occupation, although agriculture will always remain an important part of our society. So we move on to section B, short answer section. And it says, read the following extract carefully and answer the questions set on it. Peter panicked. There was nothing he could do. He was trapped with hundreds of others. The monster had come and was slowly, surely, dragging them from the deep. He swam through the excited crowd to try the bottom. Then he tried the top again. The great monster had encircled them completely. There were millions of holes in his great hands, but none large enough. If only they were a little larger. Peter tried to push himself through one of the holes again. He squeezed and squeezed. Great tails lashed around him. Not only he, but against his eyes. If only his head could get through. He pushed again, hard, and the pain quivered through his body. There was nothing he could do. He heard the breakers roaring above now. That meant they were nearing the shore. Peter whipped his tail in fury. The monster was gradually closing his hands. There were cries now above the surface. Below, the monster grated on the sand. The shore! They had reached the shore. Frantically, Peter flung himself against one of the tiny holes. He gave a cry as the scales tore from his back. Then a cry of joy. He was free, free. He lunged forward below the surface. Down he sped, rejoicing in his tininess. If he was only a little bigger, he would have been dying on the shore now. The fateful shore. There had been those who had actually come back from that world. This was one of the great mysteries. But some said they had been there and had talked of that awesome place. There was no more blood now. Down he swam, deep, deep, until the sound of the breakers was only a bitter memory. And the sea was not sandy, but blue and clear. And until, far, far away in the distance, green with fern and the tender moss, he saw the rocks of home. All right. So we have our questions here. Number 1, to whom or what does he refer? And we know that he refers to Peter. He is the subject of this entire paragraph. Number 2, state one word which could describe Peter's feelings when he realized there were millions of holes, but none large enough. And we know that this is from the first paragraph, I think. Yeah. But some words that you could have used are anxious, alarmed, frustrated, desperate. All of these describe his feelings, as he was trying to escape this monster in this passage. And speaking of that monster, number 3, says, who or what does the monster refer to? Now, from knowing that Peter is a fish, he was caught in a net. We can just infer that from that alone. But there were millions of holes in his great hands. We know that this speaks of a net. What else can we say? The monster was gradually closing his hands. Another evidence that it's a net. The monster grated on the sand, the shore. Again, a net is used to catch fish. Yeah. So we know that the monster refers to a net. Number 4, why was the sound of the breakers a bitter memory? Because Peter could have lost his life there on the shore, right? Number 5, what effect is the author trying to create by using short sentences in the passage? And we see some examples of this right at the start of the first paragraph. Peter panicked. There was nothing he could do. He was trapped with hundreds of others. So the sentences are short and compact. They say the sentence, or they say the action in the sentence as it is. There's no flair, there's no extra words. It is just bam, bam, bam. He panicked, nothing he could do. He was trapped with hundreds of others. It's just plain and straight. So what effect do these sentences have on us as we read? Well, as I said before, it creates tension, creates suspense, creates fast-moving action. We can feel his panic. We know that he's struggling to be free from the net. It is a high-stress situation. All of these we can gather from using these short sentences in opposition to longer sentences with more flowy language or words. So the last sentence, why does the author repeat squeezed in line number 6? Right, so he squeezed and squeezed right here. So from this, it shows his effort to escape. Again, we know it's the scene is filled with tension. It's a high stress situation. It's fast moving. Will he be free? Will he not? Will he make it out alive? These are all the questions we get from this type of language in the passage, right? And with that being said, that is all for this activity. So if you had these answers while you were doing that assignment, then you would have been on the right track. Okay, so with that, we can move on to essay writing. Give me a second. Right. And before that, we know that we have to do our word of the day. So our word of today is languid. And languid means showing or having very little strength, energy, or activity. It is generally used in formal and literary context. Example, we continue traveling up the hill at a languid pace. So a little did you know session. Languid is all about lack. Depending on its context, the word can suggest a lack of strength, a lack of energy, or a lack of activity. The lack of strength sense of languid describes the kind of sluggishness that often results from fatigue or weakness, as in, the illness had left her feeling languid. The lack of energy sense is synonymous with listless and often describes someone's character or disposition as a result of dissatisfaction or sadness. Lastly, there's the lack of activity sense of languid, as in investors are worried about the languid stock market. market, sorry. So language is a total bummer, right? Not so. Sometimes it is a good thing to dilly-dally, and language has also long been used to describe stretches of time. Think afternoons, days, summers, etc. that are relatively and perhaps pleasantly chill. So here we have different contexts and different uses of language that you can also use in your literary or any other context if you see it fit. Right, so let's continue. So last Thursday, we would have talked about the different elements of essays. And we talked about purpose, what is it you want to achieve in your writing, and we did touch on audience, who are you writing to, what assumptions do you make of your readers, and all of these things. So today we're gonna continue on that. So let's just close off writing for your audience. So it says again, writers learn what their audiences expect and deliberate. If you are writing for a specific discipline, in a specific genre, to a specific person, or assuming a role, different syntax, vocabulary, assumptions, jargon, habits of expression, and style/voice have to be used. Just as a text message to your friend will sound different from an email to your teacher, different approaches have to be made according to your audience. And we did bring up the example where you're speaking of, or you're writing a letter, I should say. You're writing a letter to your principal. You know, you have to be formal. You have to be polite. You have to be negotiable if you are speaking to them about a certain issue and you're presenting a solution to that problem. So you have to think of, again, your purpose that will help you figure out how to address your audience, and then your audience will help you choose your language and your style and your tone or voice in your writing. So let's talk about writing strategies. Strategy is a specific pattern you will use to organize your essay. They range from narration to description to argumentation. These strategies help you organize your thoughts and help you express them more clearly as you write. Purpose and strategy work hand in hand. And our first strategy is narration. So to narrate means to tell a story, whether by first person or third person point of view. Narrative writing convinces readers by using specific details, by following clear and understandable sequence, and by recounting the story in terms readers may have experienced in their own lives. Although narration is often seen as a literary strategy, it can also be used in informative writing and still follows the rules of stating a main topic and point. So we know of narration already. It's probably the most common form of writing, or the first form of writing you might be acquainted with as a student. Moving on, we have description. A descriptive piece of writing makes an object, person, or activity vivid for the readers by appealing to their senses: sight, sound, taste, smell, and touch. It uses a dominant impression as a central theme to unify its descriptive details. Without a dominant impression, a passage of description runs the risk of becoming overwhelmed with irrelevant details. My bad. So what is the difference between narration and description? So while a narration contains descriptive elements, of course, especially in story writing, poetry writing, drama, all of these will have to use some form of description to describe the characters, events, ideas, etc., etc. But a description does not have to explain or tell a story. A description or descriptive piece of writing just describes the object, the person, the activity, the thing, whatever it is. It's just there to describe. It's not there to explain, it's not there to narrate, it's not there to give you too much background details as a narrative would, but it just describes the item or whatever it is that it is describing. So the dominant impression is the main descriptive element of that person, place, or thing. So if it's a person and you're describing them, and it's, for example, a friendly old lady, that would be the dominant impression of your descriptive paragraph, let's say. And so in that descriptive paragraph, of course, you're gonna say, what makes the lady friendly? What in her actions, what in her physical features, what makes her friendly? And with being old, you have to describe, does she have wrinkles? Does she have gray hair? Etc., etc. So in that dominant impression and in that descriptive essay or descriptive paragraph containing that dominant impression, you're not gonna bring up a backstory of, oh, her husband died in a car crash or something. The dominant impression is that she is just a little friendly old lady. That is all the descriptive details. Or the dominant impression is what you're gonna use to choose which descriptive details you're gonna put down about that specific character. And of course, it doesn't only speak to characters, it speaks to places, things, animals, ideas, etc., etc. So we move on to example. An example begins with a generalization that it supports with specific cases. An essay built from examples must be to the point, vivid, supportive of the generalization, and clearly connected to it by introductory phrases like for example or for instance. The generalization introduces the main idea of a paragraph or essay. The overuse of generalizations without supporting examples is a common failing of student writing. So what is this generalization? A generalization is basically the topic that you're giving examples on. Yeah, that's just it. So in using a generalization and giving examples for that generalization in your writing, you're just gonna focus on that. So it says examples of mistakes in writing. You're gonna say students have problems with punctuation. Students have problems with grammar. You're not gonna bring us and say students have problem with writing equations. That doesn't have anything to do with your generalization. So that is one example of how having a clear generalization and using different examples can give more clarity to that topic and even give evidence as to why what you're saying is true, depending on what you're writing about. All right, so next up we have definition. An essay developed by definition focuses on specifying the characteristics of the subject, first by showing the general category it falls under, and then by distinguishing it from other items in the same category. Interpretations and arguments can depend on one or two key ideas that cannot be quickly and easily defined. So let's say for example, you're writing an essay that talks about chemistry as a science subject. Now, chemistry Of course, it falls under a science subject, but it is different from biology and physics, which are two other subjects under science. In defining chemistry, you're going to have to lay down how it is different in your definition. So you say chemistry deals with atoms, molecules, electrons on a deeper level than biology and physics do. Yes, they overlap in terms of some topics, but they are different fields of study. So of course, you might not be able to write a full essay on chemistry as a science subject just by defining, but in a term with a broader definition. Let's say, for example, justice or love again. You can write a longer definition essay on those topics than chemistry by itself, right? So depending on what topic you get for a definition essay, you will have either a longer essay or a shorter one, or one that reaches to a research paper. And then sometimes, especially with broader topics like love and justice, you will have to take out a specific section of that or these ideas to focus on as you are writing, because it's kind of hard to cover everything that falls under these topics, right? So we move on to comparison and contrast. So comparison contrast essays examine items for similarities and differences. The items are comparable on specific bases, and the writer alternates from one to the other. Phrases like on the other hand, likewise, similarly, in contrast, and but are commonly used in this type of writing. The writer announces what is being compared and catalogs the similarities and differences throughout the essay. Two common weaknesses in comparison contrast essays are failing to fairly examine both items on the same basis and failing to use the appropriate comparison contrast expressions. So with comparison contrast essays, you can either cover the topic subject by subject. So you say, subject 1, this is how it is similar, how it is different. Then subject 2, this is how it is similar or different. Or you can go through it point by point. So as it says, you need specific bases to compare your ideas or items on. So if one of your bases is use of money, let's say you're comparing how two different people spend money. So you can say, well, one person uses their money in a wise way. So they only buy things that they need. And if they seek to buy things that they want, they compare prices. And then you can say, on the other hand, person number 2, they buy anything without any serious thought. So once they see it, they buy it. They don't compare it to something else to get a better price. They just see it and buy it. So that is an example of the point-by-point comparison contrast. We move on to process slash sequence. Process essays give specific step-by-step instructions on how to do something or details of how something happened. They can give instructions on how to bake a cake, how to go to the library, how to apply for a visa, or how an accident took place. Writing process is usually straightforward and follows a chronological order. Students might have challenges modeling the sequence of events or instructions. So again, it's easy, step-by-step explanation or instruction on how to do something or details of how something happened, right? Classification. To classify means to divide something and group its elements into major categories and types. Almost similar to definition, but not definition. Classification must be based on a single principle, for example, age, level, and description, and be complete. So it must contain all elements that meet the specific principle. The writer has to specify the principle of the classification and list the items, ideas, or people that fall under the principle. So for example, what are the different types of students in a school? You say you have the freshmen, the juniors, the sophomores, the seniors. All of these come under one classification, which is types of students. So that's the single principle. Types of students, it is based on the year of study. So yeah, that it would be the single principle, and it is complete since it contains all the levels of learning or years of learning in a specific school, right? Cause and effect, causal analysis. Causal analysis attempts to relate two events by asserting that the occurrence of one event is the reason for the occurrence of another. While cause relates two events by asserting one event as the reason for another, effect relates two events by asserting one event as a result of another. However, causal analysis can be tricky since few situations can be traced directly to a single clear cause. An effect is most times preceded by a chain of causes, and tracing causation can oftentimes lead to absurdity. Student-written causal analysis sometimes suffers from dogmatism, an authoritative stating of opinion as fact without sufficient evidence. So as was said before, causal analysis can be tricky. Why? Well, again, as you see the causes of a specific thing, let's say, for example, global warming. What causes global warming? They will say industry, excessive use of pollutants from these specific industries. But then what causes industry? We cause industry. You know, it's like that. So most times with cause and effect, you have to lay out a few causes or a few effects of such causes and not go into a tumbleweed of a causal chain to the back and finding some absurd conclusion at the end of the day, right? So you have to be specific and choose your causes and effects wisely. And lastly, we have argumentation/persuasive. Argumentation persuades or convinces the reader of the writer's viewpoint. It often uses a combination of strategies simultaneously, analyzing cause, describing, comparing/contrasting, and defining. An argumentative essay has no single strategy of development, but is recognizable instead by its intent/purpose. An argument involves the complex formulation of ideas and facts. So again, argumentative writing is nothing new to you as a student, and it uses a variety of the strategies that we would have just went through. And just because you are writing a specific essay, expository, etc., does not mean that you only have to stick to one strategy. Just as with argumentative writing, you can also use several strategies in your writing, and you have already used these strategies in your writing as well. So don't feel pressure to just stick to one strategy as you are writing your essays. When it comes to, you're going to use examples, you're going to describe, you're going to define, you're going to use cause and effect, sequence. You're going to use all of them, even in one broad-headed essay, right? So don't be afraid to use different strategies in one writing setting, but only use them if they are needed as you write. So that is all for today's class, and I hope that I will see you again next week, Tuesday, and we will be going through problems with adverbs, and if we have time, we can go to problems with conjunctions. So thank you again for listening, and I hope I'll see you next week, Tuesday. Have a good day.